up, Daniel? What's up, dude? Victor? No name? What's up, guys? Just testing the stream real quick. Welcome, welcome. You want to see yourself? There you go. Hold on, Victor. Let me see. Just testing out the stream real quick, because I need to test a couple things here. Let's do that one for now. Why is it giving me that? No. Roblox. Hey, purple. Hey, purple dude. Purple dude. What's up? Trying to get things settled here. Yeah, I made you a mod a couple days ago. There's a bit of a stream delay for some reason, so I'm gonna have to adjust that. Settings. Customize. 1 minute. Nope. Yeah, I made you a moderator a couple days ago. There's a stream delay for this for some reason. I might have to fix that. Yes, I have a stream running. What the fuck? Hold on, why is this thing taking my whole screen up? Oh, it's because I have it down here. Okay, I see. Hello. Oh, fuck, why is this thing taking my whole screen up? Chrome. Nope. Not what I meant to do. Close that. Hello. Daniel Storm is in here too. and nope. Alright, and there you go. That's settled. What else here? Let's see if this works. That is not what I wanted drawing. I'm doing good. Hold on. Doing just fine. vehicle. Oh. Oh, thank you. This is just a test live stream. Hope you feel better though. How the fuck do you get out again? testing a live stream. Let's see. Okay, let's see here. Just a little bit low. Let's do this. Got it. Hope you can hear me. Yep, there you go. Oh, Jesus. aren't you the person that I subscribed to before? I forgot your name. God damn it. Juno, I swear to God.
Saw at the Becca. It was odd because all
There are a lot of things that matter to me: family, community, culture, and peace of mind. Hi, it's Wilmer Valderrama, and when balancing life, I have to say nothing brings more comfort than having support. And when it comes to ensuring those things that matter to you the most, State Farm offers the support with an agent available in person or on the phone to discuss your coverage options. Support when you need it.
Unexpected visitors. My name is Edwin, and here is a scary story. By far, the scariest experience I've ever had in my life happened after I moved out of my parents' house. This was after I graduated from high school. I was 18 years old and was truly confused about what I wanted to do with my life. My dad was a salesman. My mom used to stay at home. So it was more or less conventional, and what you would consider to be normal. I remember thinking that things were just never enough. Many of my friends had continued on to college. They were sure of what they wanted to do. But for me, I just wanted to sing. At the time, of course, we think that just because we're in choir and get a few solos every now and then, that we'll be set to make a career out of it. But I didn't know what I was in for. I got a job at a fast food restaurant and ended up renting out an apartment, though it was more of a half apartment, I guess you could say. Back then, rent was a lot cheaper. I think I used to pay around $350, so I managed to make ends meet. The landlord had converted the back part, which at one point included the garage of a large building, and it was all put into an apartment on its own. It was weird, but it was cheap, and it worked out for a while. While I was working, I was also taking lessons from a person in the singing business. You know, getting gigs and stuff. I was mostly doing events at parties and at a church with her. Alicia Gomez was her name. And she had more than enough awards behind her that I didn't quite understand why nobody had ever heard of her. Her voice was raspy now, from all those years behind microphones and on stages in the region. But the best part about her was the way she taught. I could go on and on about everything that she helped me with. But when I really sit down and think about Alicia, everything had been tainted by one thing. And it wasn't even about her. It all started when the landlord told me that they were going to be selling the building and that I just had a couple of months to find another place. I remember I asked to borrow the phone at the church where we had settled in for our lessons for several weeks. We were in the meeting area / classrooms where the kids would take lessons of Christianity or something. I wasn't very religious back then, and I didn't know how anything worked, honestly. Anyway, I think Alicia could tell that I was worried, because she asked me what was wrong. It didn't seem like such a hard thing to do at first, but after calling all of those places, I realized I might not have a place to stay, and I would be forced to move back in with my parents or ask a friend to take me in for a while. The problem itself seems like such an insignificant one now, but back then I really wanted to prove to everyone that I could make it on my own. And so I explained everything to Alicia. And she said she was going to be visiting her sons in Texas for a few weeks and would love it if I stayed at her house to take care of it. Since I could move out as soon as I wanted to as part of the agreement with my landlord, I agreed. And so about a week and a half after that, I had 4 boxes and a suitcase ready. And it was then picked up with the help of one of my friends, and we drove up to the house. I had been there a couple of times, and it was a beautiful home. It was made of gray stones, it had an enormous garden, and a large chocolate-colored pit bull, Emmy, that liked to chase flies and insects around the yard. The house itself was on its own lot, so without any neighbors sharing walls or anything. That side of town had the nicer houses, so most of the other ones were like that too. This one had a wall around the property, a long driveway up to the garage area, and then a walkway through the garden and then to the house. The last time I had been there was for a reunion of her and some of her friends from the industry, and though most were retired, they knew a ton about every aspect of making it. It had been a nighttime event, so we had all been in the yard. I had been only in that living room area when we moved in for late night coffee that same night, but that was that. Thinking that I would have that place to myself for a little under a month made me feel a huge relief. But also, there was something odd about the place that I couldn't put my finger on. In the garden, some of the larger decorations looked like tombstones. And even though the area was well kept, it had a lot of plants, like an exaggerated amount of them. And it made the areas around the house feel so dark. There was no way to see through the garden because of all the thickness of it. Inside the house, it was more of the same thing. Alicia liked portraits, and she had many of herself along the walls, and also had painted versions of her artist's friends and even older imagery. At one point, I asked her about the black and white photographs, and she said that they had been there when she had gotten the house. And in such an Alicia way of saying things, she claimed that an artist's work should be respected. And so she kept everything. Plus, she said, she didn't want to upset them. Them, I thought back then, was referring to the artists. But them turned out to be something else. Alicia was there for 2 more nights, coming and going while I stayed in the guest bedroom. I didn't know how busy she used to be, which made me appreciate her making the time to work with me even more. But finally, one night, she said that she was going to be catching her flight early in the morning, and we said our goodbyes, and she gave me the list of tasks that she had scribbled on the backside of a flyer, one that came in the mail. It was said mainly things about watering her plants, what Emmy needed to eat and how often, and some cash to buy food and whatnot. My time there was to be 100% dedicated to finding a place to stay. I didn't want to reach the end of November without knowing where I was going to be staying next. But I also couldn't cross out the idea that I would have to live with roommates, that I needed to be more open with things. I just couldn't be picky. The first thing I noticed was that silence that next morning. Alicia, despite her being an older woman with a serious expression all the time, she loved putting on music every morning when she cooked breakfast. She liked to spend time outside in the seating area of her garden. But now there was nothing, and I had that whole house to myself. For the first few days or so, everything went great. But around day 10, I started feeling a weird sense of uneasiness, especially at night. It might have been all in my head, but I would hear footsteps around the house. Emmy used to sleep outside in her doghouse, and no matter how I tried to explain it to myself, it made no sense. One night, it was around 11, and I had just gotten home from work with a burger and fries I had been given. And I was in the guest room, I had the television on, and I was just doing my own thing, when I clearly heard someone was walking around the living room area. The floors were made of creaky wood, so it was pretty clear. I turned down the volume all the way and tried to stay completely still on the bed, hoping that I wouldn't make the springs make noise. When I heard the footsteps, someone was coming up the stairs. In my head, I was imagining where the steps were, and maybe 5 or so steps later, when they should have been in the middle of the staircase, the sound stopped. I stood up and locked the door to the room. I stepped back from it as silently as I could, staring at the doorknob, just in case I saw any movement. But after a few moments, I realized no, I was safe. I kept the television on the whole night until I fell asleep. That next morning, as I was walking down the stairs, I tried to look for clues. I don't know if I was looking for footprints or any signs of anyone being in the house, but the front door and the side doors were locked. The windows were shut, and nothing seemed out of place. Well, except for one thing. You see, when I was walking up the stairs a little while later, I noticed that along the hallway on the side where Alicia's room was, one of her portraits was leaning against the wall, on the floor. I just left it like that, assuming that maybe I hadn't noticed it had already been that way. The next several nights, although I was creeped out, I didn't hear much. The occasional knock or steps around the house, but that was it. It creeped me out, but I try not to make a big deal out of it. But it was on that third week, just a couple of days before Alicia was going to return, when I found out what it was. Now, I don't know what time it was, but Emmy started barking uncontrollably from out in the yard. I looked outside and found her growling at one of the windows of the house, and I was just about to open mine to get Emmy's attention. But then, I heard noises from inside of the house. Emmy then yelped and whined and backed away toward the garden. She lay down on the grass and she kept still, now completely quiet. You know how when a trained dog gets called or told to lay down? That's what she did. I wanted to find out what the noises were, and realizing that I would probably never get the chance to stay there again and figure it out, I made up my mind to walk out of the room and peek out from the railings of the upstairs hallway. It sounded like someone was walking around, or arranging objects in the living room area of the house. And so I opened up my door and stepped out quietly. I leaned toward the handrails. There was something there. I could clearly see a woman floating from the living room area toward the bottom of the stairs. She wore a long black skirt and a white blouse, her hair up, in a style I had only seen in old movies. I was frozen, but not in fear, though I definitely felt it. But it was as if my body just wouldn't react, and yet I still wanted to find out who she was. I didn't put two and two together. And I just watched as she moved up the stairs toward the hallway, toward me. When people tell you about a ghost that they saw, they usually say that they couldn't see its face. But I could. I remember it still. And she looked right at me before she disappeared. The house was completely still after that. And I remember that walk back to my room, maybe just 9 or 10 steps, but still, those chills and how my conception of reality was shifting at that very moment, with every step etching itself even more into my brain. I don't know how I slept that night with the footsteps, the movement. It was as if the house itself was alive. And I kept imagining that woman in her face looking right at me. When Alicia got back and asked me how everything was, I told her, in that tone that showed that I wasn't exactly afraid, but that I noticed something was off. She knew what I was talking about and stood in silence for a while, lost in thought. Eventually, through a sigh and a half smile, she looked away and said to herself that maybe it was time to put her portrait back. The second story is called You Need to Leave, and it's coming up right after this. Stay with me. Imagine you're on a train, looking out the window. Earlier that day, you received devastating news about your sister, and you're thrown into solving a mystery while discovering family secrets. That's how June's Journey, a game for iOS and Android, starts off. It's a hidden object mystery mobile game that turns you into a detective. You're shown scenes around the estate with clues, photographs, and I got all into it, discovering the story of June Parker's family. You see, they were involved in some pretty shady stuff. You have to figure out how June's sister died. And there are love stories, crime, mystery. It takes you all over the place, from New York to Paris, and it's all set in the 1920s. The story continues at your own pace, with each chapter getting even more intriguing than the last. It even gave me some ideas for the podcast. Discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android. What are we gonna eat today? I don't know about you, but that question kind of stresses me out. But here's a good option though. How about a home-cooked meal, but without having to plan ahead? Home Chef actually makes it really easy and saves you money. Anyone listening have picky eaters at home? You know the kind. Well, with 18 new options each week from the kid-friendly family menu from Home Chef, there's one bed, so two of us, me and the other guy, took one bed, and the girl got her own. And seriously, I don't know how anyone stays at motels. I've refused to do so ever since, and even though not every one of them is bad, or, has a weird thing going on, I'm telling you, this one had the strangest vibe to it. It was hard not to notice it. There were no other places or businesses around it for miles except for an old gas station that wasn't even open 24 hours like we're used to. The attendant at the front was this old guy, not trained well in customer service at all. And the room reeked of smoke, and even though there was a huge no smoking sign on the back side of the door. We were all tired, so we didn't speak very much. Plus, I was the one that had chosen the place we were going to stay at through an app, and I didn't want to be the one to say, "Hey guys, do you notice how creepy this place is?" I stepped out of the room for a bit just to get some air outside. I hadn't really seen snow in my life, except for one time when we drove by a snowy road when I was a kid, so I wanted to check out the area. When I stepped out into the hallway, I happened to see what seemed like a very tall person walking around the corner in the direction that I would be walking to. I normally avoid people, so I don't have to say hi or anything, but there was no other way for me to go, and so I kept walking. I passed by the area where the other person should have been. But instead of finding a hallway or some other room, I just found a tiny nook. Not even large enough to be a waiting room. It only had a snack machine, a drink machine, and something I'm assuming was the ice machine, though it said that it was out of order. There was no one else, and there was nowhere to hide. I figured it must have been all in my head, so I went out toward the entrance and stood around the benches. I was out by the parking lot, looking around. 2 other cars were there that night, and they were on the other side of where ours was. That stillness in the night was incredible. Growing up in Southern California, you never get that type of quiet, anywhere. But it was too cold for me, so after a few minutes I turned around and walked back inside, and that's when I saw the silhouette again. It was turning toward the same area I had seen it the first time. The vending machines were. This time I was sure that I had seen somebody. A tall figure, a man, wearing a long coat, all in black, and turning the corner. But once again, after I passed by there was nothing. I went back to the room where my 2 friends were, and they were getting ready to sleep. My spot was over by the window where the heater was. So I just got ready for bed while all 3 of us talked for a bit about what we would be doing the next day. The conversation died on its own, and soon everyone was fast asleep. Not much time had passed before I was woken up by a light tapping on the window. A persistent one, like they were trying to get my attention. I laid perfectly still to see if maybe it would stop on its own, and after a couple more taps, everything was silent again. I thought it must have been someone from outside, a homeless person or some other guest that was confusing the room's window with someone else. Maybe they had forgotten their key or something. All I could hear was that soft humming of the heater next to me, and for a brief moment I thought that maybe that was the cause of the tapping. With that relief in mind, I was able to relax a bit, and then just when I was about to go to sleep, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just a tap. I could hear a faint whisper, saying clearly, "You need to leave." The thing was that the voice wasn't coming from outside of the room, but right in there, right in front of me by the foot of the bed. I remember smiling to myself, nervously wondering what was happening, but I was also trying to talk myself out of thinking that it was anything other than my own imagination. Then I heard the tapping again. This time I turned my head toward the window, only to see the tall figure of a man standing right against it, looking angrily toward me. He whispered, "You need to leave." I sat up, leaning toward the headrest, trying to scream, but with nothing coming out. I tried to shake Tejas, my friend, awake, but he wouldn't budge. I don't know how long I spent trying to avoid looking at this thing's eyes, but before I knew it, I was awake. I just opened my eyes, looking straight up at the ceiling. The whole thing had been a nightmare, and it was gone. I was safe. Through the glow coming from the outside, I could tell that my friends were sleeping. I could feel my shoulders relaxing, even against that stiff mattress, but still, I wasn't able to fall back asleep. So I reached for my phone that had been charging on the floor, when I once again saw that dark figure standing right next to me. "You need to leave." But then, from behind me, I heard Anna gasp, and suddenly the lamp in between the beds flooded the room with its orange glow. She asked loudly who the hell that was, and Tejas woke up, unaware of what we had both seen. I asked Anna if she had seen it, and she said that yes, it was a man standing by the window. He had vanished as soon as she turned on the lamp. We stayed up for most of the night. Mainly Anna and I were talking about what we had seen and telling other stories. And then I told her about the figure I had seen earlier that same night. I don't know what it was. And despite all my research about that place, I haven't found anything. Anna and I remained good friends ever since, and whenever we meet up with Tejas and the story comes up, he still thinks we're pranking him. And that's alright. At least I know, and Anna knows, that there's more out there. Scary.
Don't just watch another Cinderella story steal the spotlight. This basketball...
In the early morning, lashing the doors of the barn, rounding up the two stubborn hogs, and shuttering the windows, but soon I found myself rooted in place, captivated by the writhing shape in the sky. It stretched impossibly wide across the open sky, rolling across the border from Nebraska. The air had a dry electric chill, and already the sickly yellow wheat swayed in anticipation. I was in a trance, eyes locked on the distance, when I saw a small light dust plume to the west, picked out in stark contrast with black beyond. The horse and rider at the base of the little dust devil approached the farm at a sharp trot, and my dust-bleary eyes registered the silhouette. Carl Jordan had owned the farm next to mine for, as along my family has been in the Dakotas. I grew up with his great booming laughter warming our home nearly every night. His usual broad, yellowing smile was absent beneath recently trimmed mustache and broad-rimmed black hat. His dark suit was blotted with fine layer of grit that he brushed absently at. Eddie. His voice was tired and small as he looked down at me. No church today. I hadn't been in months and he'd once admitted to envying me. I just didn't see the need any longer and I've relished the extra hours. I ignored the question. What's troubling you, Carl? Matty all right? I asked. He turned towards the south, to the storm, and sucked loudly on his lower lip. After a few moments of thought he sighed deeply, with a phlegmy rumble. The Hattersons are dead. All of them, except Saul. He said evenly, not returning his gaze to mine. I drank this in for a moment, feeling the insides my sinuses beginning to burn in the cold and arid breeze. I briefly dwelt upon the image of the youngest Hatterson, a tow-headed toddler with the dim-looking smile I'd seen at the general store with Saul and Molly a few days prior. How? I asked finally. He grimaced slightly, still gazing south. Saul's missing. No one's seen him since last night. Molly and the kids are dead, and Saul's gone. It don't sound good. Close quote. Carl slumped forward a little, and I saw, not for the first time, how old he was. The whole hornet's nest is stirred up over in Picton. He was gonna lose the farm, they say. Fleetingly, it concerned me that I could easily see the connection between these facts. Matty's fine, he said after another silent moment. Just a little ill this morning, thanks for asking. Close quote. He broke from the black clouds and fixed his eyes on me. He offered a pale imitation of his familiar smile, but his eyes remained squinted tight, haunted.
Don't just watch another Cinderella story steal the spotlight. This basketball season, take your best shot at bovada.lv. Come off the bench and play with
.com/podcast.
He looked as if he had more to say, but at last, he just nodded and gathered the reins. Be safe, Eddie, he said, a phrase worn smooth by repeated use, and turned towards his farm, trotting quickly, head still crooked towards the storm. By noon, I could only watch as it reached up and blotted out the sun. The dust storm enveloped us, obscuring the sky like the hands of God. I did my best to ration the allotment of bourbon I'd poured off that morning, watching the black wind scour the earth through a broken shutter slat. During the storms of the years before, pale and weak compared to this tempest, Adele would huddle with the girls to read scripture, inevitably ending with the revelations in hushed reverent tones. I'd tried not to scowl at her fear and awe before, but now I could feel a little tremor of doubt in me as I looked out at the sackcloth sky. When the sky darkened a few shades at nightfall, I prepared a small meal of bread and fried eggs, and drained the rest of the bourbon. Later, I laid in the unmade bed with the world spinning, and the sky howling outside, and tried not to think. The storm raged stronger than ever the next morning, the sun winking through the maelstrom, a fat circle of hazy orange like a fading coal. Late in the day, it showed no sign of abating, and I resigned to leave the house, if only to feed the animals. I tied my goggles to my head and a damp bandana around my mouth, but I still gasped at the ragged burn of the dust when I stepped outside into the storm. The lining of my throat seemed to crack and bleed within moments. I could barely see the barn, but I set out instinctually towards it. A tall hillock of fine black dust was pressed to the side, and it took me a few kicks to clear the door. The dust had seeped in everywhere, and the hogs and cows were covered in a layer of grime. They stood still in their pens, eyes red and glassy, shuddering and jerking with each loud creak from the roof beams. They ignored the food. There was a twisting coil of anxiety in my chest when Carl arrived, leading the terrified horse behind him. His beard was matted with dust, and he had to sweep the lenses of the goggles clean at my doorstep, but instead of entering, he only waved me out to join him. "You need to come with me," he shouted over the storm. The dust between his teeth had formed a thin black mud that flecked at the corners of his mouth. It was his tone, flat and even, that terrified me. I didn't argue, but pulled on goggles, and offered him a second bandana. I followed close behind him, one hand on the horse's haunch. Carl picked his way down the path, navigating by some uncanny memory of the curves in the little road. We walked cautiously and deliberately west for the better part of half a mile, past Carl's own farm, towards the leaning shape of the Collins farm. A throbbing dread began to stir in my breast.
Looks like you need a vacation. Enter the 5-Hour Energy Where Will the Tide Take You?
It was all dark. She was wearing black clothes, and she noticed she had only 3 fingers. She was staring directly at my sister. She looked just like Rebecca. She didn't bother with her. She went on shrugging it off. She slammed herself onto the glass door, and my sister stopped. It wasn't strong enough to make the glass shake, but you would hear it. It was strong enough that you could hear it. My sister looked at her and said, What are you doing? There's a door right there if you want to walk through it. She got annoyed more than scared when she went back onto doing the decorations. Second time, she slammed herself full body onto the glass. She got more irritated. She's like, what are you doing? There's a door right there at the Becca if you want to walk through it. She pointed at it. But the girl wasn't looking at anything else but my sister. Direct eye contact. The third time was after a couple of minutes. It was so hard that she said the glass shake to the point it almost broke. My sister got so mad. She ran through the door and it was gone. She was then creeped out and went to the maid's room. It was on the first floor. They were all wearing pink and bright colors, and they said, like, have you seen Atebeka? No. She is upstairs taking care of Gabby. She said, that's impossible because she was just downstairs watching me